Hi everyone! This is going to be a short video on how to achieve bracketing when you are taking photographs of your subjects. So as a reminder, bracketing is a shooting technique where we are taking a series of photographs where we are purposefully underexposing and overexposing them when we are having a hard time deciding on what kind of exposure we want in a difficult lighting situation. As a reminder, all three components of the exposure triangle can either make our image brighter or darker. So ISOs, the two camps, low ISOs can make our image darker, so we use them in bright lighting conditions. High ISOs make our images brighter. People use them in dim lighting situations, but we risk image quality there. Then we have shutter speed. Slow shutter speeds make our images brighter, and then fast shutter speeds make our images darker. And then the last one, aperture. Our wide apertures make our image brighter, and then our narrow apertures make them darker. So even though my sun is behind the clouds right now, I'm going to see it peek out in just a moment. So I'm going to keep my ISO at 100 because it is the lowest sensitivity, so it will make that darker image, but having a bright lighting condition will accommodate for that darkness to get the exposure that I want. When we do the bracketing technique to get our images brighter and darker, we are only changing one variable of the exposure triangle. One thing to note, ISO affects image quality. When it comes to deciding what components to change, don't change your ISO. Right now, for me, if I did the bracketing technique, I would stay underneath ISO 400. So I would maintain my image quality, but remember, bracketing is for those difficult lighting situations. So if you end up in an area where you potentially need to go into the higher ISOs to accomplish this technique, you are going to risk losing that dynamic range and the sharpness in your images. Leave ISO alone, pick the appropriate one that is going to maintain your image quality, and use a tripod for this technique. Tripods, I've already beat that into your heads as to why they are important. 3 points of contact, stabilization with slow shutter speeds, maintaining focus. But then here, what's really crucial is wherever our lens is pointing, that is where our light meter is going to evaluate how much light we need. So if you don't use a tripod and you try bracketing, you are going to have your composition shift a little bit. Or you might just make a simple mistake of, as soon as you take your photograph, pointing the camera down and looking at the playback button to see how your exposure and composition work. This just helps to ensure consistency with where our lens is pointing to make sure we are reading the amount of light in that particular area. Alrighty, so my sun's out and it's gross out. So let's get this going. When we have our LCD screen showing up in manual mode, we see the three components of our exposure triangle. Shutter speed left, aperture center, ISO right. Light meter is underneath it. To wake up your light meter, the needle, press the shutter button halfway down. Now you will see that my little tick is just slightly below that 0 there. So to get that proper exposure, I want to have it in the middle. Proper exposure, again, the interchangeable word for that is a normal exposure. So when you have your light meter awake, and right now I'm just going to adjust shutter speed. If I move my dial back and forth, you're going to see that guy be squirrely and moving around and showing me when I'm underexposing. So right here to where I'm overexposing. So over here on the right. To change aperture again, pressing this AV button with the positive and negative square sign. Seeing those blue triangles move over to my f-stop, and then again press your shutter speed to wake it up, your light meter, and then now as I move the dial back and forth in conjunction with that aperture button, you see that light meter moving back and forth. Now, another way to see how your exposure settings are either making the normal exposure, overexposure, or underexposure is we actually have a live view button. And that live view button, as I shade this, is going to be that little camera right next to the red dot in the top right hand corner of your LCD screen next to the viewfinder. Okay, so as I press this live view button, you are going to see a live view of whatever your lens is pointing at, the composition that you would be framing up in your viewfinder. Right now, my LCD screen is very, very bright, and it's because it's reflecting the exposure settings that I have just created for this image. So when you press the shutter, like you would to wake up your light meter with the regular LCD screen you would see, you can look underneath that live view and see our exposure settings. So 30th being the shutter speed, 4.0 being the aperture. Right next to the aperture is our light meter. So again, when I depress this button, you are going to see my little needle perk up, and it's at the +3, so super overexposed, which we can tell because of where it's pointing and the LCD screen being super bright. Now that the sun has gone behind the clouds again, we actually see our light meter moving down stops, where now we can actually see more detail within the image. The numbers right next to the light meter, where it says all of those 9s, that's just showing how many shots you have on your SD card, and then you see the ISO value and then a full battery. So here I am going to move my scroll wheel back and forth for shutter speed, and it's going to show my image getting darker in correspondence to my needle heading into the left, and then now as I start making slower shutter speeds, my LCD screen is getting really bright. So a great way to see your composition in a larger format. Sometimes looking through the viewfinder can be a little bit annoying and difficult. And then also seeing your exposure change in real time, because the viewfinder does not allow that because of our mirror blocking the sensor. Now let's go ahead and take our series of photographs. I am wanting to photograph this plant because with the direct sun I am getting a lot of interesting shadows being cascaded onto the bench on my deck. So keeping it at ISO 100, super bright, I am going to make a more narrow aperture and then now what I'm going to do as far as choosing which variable of my exposure triangle I want to change, I am going to choose shutter speed. So depressing my shutter halfway, moving my shutter speed dial while it's awake to get my exposure to be normal. Now I'm going to take a photograph. It's going to show that quick 2-second preview. And then now we are making a one-stop change in the positive and negative. So here I'm going to move my scroll wheel down to where it says -1, take a photograph, and then going into the positive one and take a photograph. I'm going to do another series where I'm going to just change my aperture setting, just so that you can see that you can do it with both of these settings. So waking up, my light meter, it's almost in the middle, so taking a photo. It's my normal, my preview, and then now waking it up again, going towards my smaller numbers, my wider apertures because they let in more light, and then now my last one, going to my larger numbers, my more narrow apertures to make it darker. And that's it. I've just completed 2 series of bracketing.